After the recent Sparking Zero trailer was released, also known as Tenkaichi 4, I made a video discussing 3 what-if battles that were featured in the trailer specifically and gave an overview as to what would happen. Now after uploading that video, I got several requests to dive deeper into one of those what-if scenarios more specifically after a conversation ensued, and this one is specifically dealing with what if Krillin actually joined Goku to go fight against Raditz instead of Piccolo, and how Dragon Ball history would turn out. And for those who don't know, for those of you who are new, we analyze what-if scenarios on this channel, but we analyze what-if scenarios from a realistic point of view, given the nature of Toriyama's writing and the way that he set up how characters behave throughout Dragon Ball history. So for those who are new, that's what we do. And in this video, we have to first start the video by discussing one important thing. And this, of course, is why Krillin and Master Roshi were originally not a part of the fight in the first place. And originally, the reason why they weren't selected to fight was because of the fact that Krillin had already died before in what we call Dragon Ball against Tambourine, and also Master Roshi also died in Dragon Ball 2 when he confronted King Piccolo, and he used the Mafuba to try and stop him, which wore out his body, and he eventually succumbed to the attack, and he died. And because of this, Goku said that because Krillin and Master Roshi had died before, that he didn't want them to potentially die again, because at this specific point in time, because of the way the Dragon Balls worked, you could only wish for one person one time before everything got changed when Dende came far into the future. So as a result of it, if Krillin and Master Roshi were to die on the battlefield again, they could never come back at that particular point in time, because traveling to Planet Namek and all of that stuff wasn't in the cards at the time, because Piccolo was still quote-unquote a demon, because the whole Namekian stuff didn't come out until years later. But it is still possible that Krillin could just say, hey Goku, I don't want you to go alone, so I'll just jump in and team up with you. And this would also assume that Goku rejected Piccolo's offer. Now, I discussed in that video that I think realistically, if we try to analyze how characters would behave, Piccolo wouldn't in all likelihood just get rejected by Goku and just sit there and do nothing, because Piccolo's smart enough to know that Goku and himself are around the same strength, even though he was developing the Makanka Sappo, special beam cannon, to kill Goku. So Piccolo knew that he needed Goku's help in order to defeat Raditz. It's one of those typical things where you say, you know, the bigger enemy is a person that we need to team up to defeat. The enemy of the enemy is my friend, even though it's not technically completely solidified at this point, because Piccolo was still a villain because of the very last arc. But the point is that Raditz was a bigger threat, and that's why they teamed up. So if Krillin teamed up with Goku, how would this go? Now, this would be an interesting scenario, because as we saw briefly in the trailer, Krillin was like flying fully, which you'd be surprised to know this was not something that we really saw until later on in Dragon Ball, because Krillin was shown flying briefly in a battle against Piccolo Jr. in the 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai, but he wasn't shown flying to like this absolute extent yet. See, at this point in Dragon Ball, flying was still kind of a new thing, which is why Goku was still using the Nimbus, and Toriyama hadn't fully fledged out that everybody flies to this specific point. So that's just one little interesting side note. But on the battlefield itself, there's a lot of things to analyze here. The first thing that we have to point out is that because Krillin is a lot weaker than Piccolo, when they team up against Raditz specifically, he would be more battle-worn than Piccolo would be, taking the damage from Raditz directly. Also specifically because of the fact that in the battle itself, Raditz fired an energy blast that blew off Piccolo's arm. Now, of course, Piccolo always gets his arm up because Toriyama has to remind us that, you know, Piccolo can always regenerate, so as a result of it, Piccolo is always losing limbs, which is kind of funny. But the point that we're trying to get at here is that because Krillin is weaker than Piccolo, he wouldn't have been able to survive or last long enough in that initial fight where Goku and Krillin, in retrospect, would have been fighting in place of Piccolo. So because of this, it kind of paints a picture of Krillin would probably be too badly damaged to even continue fighting or doing anything else. And because he can't regenerate, and because he doesn't have a special beam cannon to use, this would be a difficult situation. However, there's still one alternative that I think can change the entire nature of the battle itself. And as you would have guessed, this, of course, would be the Destructo Disc. Now, the Destructo Disc wasn't a technique that was used at this point in the series. It showed up for the first time when Krillin was fighting against Nappa, and he threw it in. It almost actually killed Nappa because it sliced his cheek, and had it hit a certain angle, it would have cut Nappa's entire head off, which is crazy to believe that Krillin came very, very close to literally killing a character far more powerful than him, which really shows the nature of the Destructo Disc itself. But despite all of this, though, and it's also kind of funny to point out, too, that Vegeta also had a similar Destructo Disc technique himself, even though people don't call it a Destructo Disc for Vegeta. The same thing goes for Goku. Other characters have used this technique, and the same thing also goes for Frieza. It's just funny how for Krillin it's called Destructo Disc, but when other characters do the exact same thing, it's called something else. But the point that we're trying to get at here is that throughout this battle, the only thing that I can see Goku and Krillin doing that would directly impact the life of Raditz would be if Krillin can somehow use a Destructo Disc way earlier than he was initially supposed to in the Dragon Ball franchise, and through this, he sorta just cuts Raditz in half, or cuts his head off, or something like this. Now, the problem is Raditz is very fast, and he even dodged Piccolo's initial special beam cannon to show you how fast he was. He still got damaged in the shoulder, but he was able to evade that technique, which we would assume is also extremely fast. So, it's a situation where, how does Krillin hit Raditz with this technique? And the only thing I could think of is throughout the battle, some way or at some point, Goku is able to grab onto Raditz's tail. Very similar to how he was able to grab onto his tail when Raditz was distracted originally, where Goku grabbed onto his tail and Raditz started talking to him, and as a result of Goku, trusting his evil brother that kidnapped his nephew and son, in Goku's case, he let go of his tail and then Raditz attacked him. Now, here's the interesting thing about all of this. If Goku was to hold Raditz at a specific angle like this, and let's say Krillin could, throw a Destructo Disc and, Raditz, runs till, his tail pulls off, that's one way that this would fail. But if somehow, some way, Raditz is just completely unable to react to Goku holding onto his tail, then this would be the only shot that I give Goku and Krillin to take out Raditz directly. Now, I wanted to give some alternatives for those who don't want to hear this part of it being unrealistic, so I thought about Master Roshi. Now, of course, just flying to Raditz in the first place would be kind of an issue, because Master Roshi would have to use Gamera, which, for those who forgot in the original Dragon Ball, was his flying turtle that, spins around and Roshi stays on it. And that's how he travels throughout the world. And in Dragon Ball Super, this Gamera robot kind of thing was sort of the replacement, because it wasn't a live, living turtle as what we saw in the original Dragon Ball. It kind of became more of a robotic turtle device that Roshi uses to kind of spin around. So we could paint this a whole bunch of different ways, but if Master Roshi was to join in on the battle, this is an alternative way that they could have defeated Raditz, where Roshi could use a Mafuba to basically seal Raditz away. Now, once again, I'm saying this, that Raditz is a very fast character, and the Mafuba is a technique that, we could say Master Roshi at this particular point in time would have been far too weak to even have a successful attack against Raditz, because Master Roshi also pointed out, as we've said, that you have to be somewhat relative to the other person in strength for the technique to even work. So, the technique even working on Raditz is doubtful, but it is an alternative that Roshi could use to take Raditz down. And then we also have another alternative in Tien, where Tien could just notice the battle happening and then he just flies over to try and help Goku, and maybe he could use a Tri-Beam to try and really badly damage Raditz, and then the Z-Fighters just kind of gang up on Raditz, combined with the fact that Gohan could always rage out and headbutt him or attack him in some way. But Gohan's always a wild card in this situation, so I'm trying to really focus on the other characters and what they can do, more so than relying on Gohan, who is the wild card. And at this particular point in Dragon Ball, Tien was stronger than Krillin, so he would actually hold his own better. So what I'm getting at here is, if the others were going to help, they would have to come in and all kind of gang up on Raditz. And one thing Dragon Ball has taught us is that if you're significantly weaker than another character, even if you gang up on them, you're not really going to be able to have a lot of success unless you have a technique that can directly take him out. And the unfortunate thing about the Tri-Beam and the unfortunate thing about the Mafuba is that those techniques wear on the user directly and can potentially kill them. So those are techniques that they would have to use as a last resort, as shown with Tien in his battle against Nappa. So the techniques that would even give them a shot at winning would be unrealistic too. So ultimately, all of this is to say that Piccolo would still have to ultimately jump into battle against Raditz, because like I said, it's unrealistic for Piccolo to do nothing about it, and Piccolo is just the only character who's somewhat relative to Goku in power, so he could like survive against Raditz initially without completely being worn down in the fight. And then when you also consider the fact that Piccolo has the Makanka Sapo, he was just the perfect character to use in this situation because he was developing that technique to kill Goku, and when he got a chance to hit Raditz the second time when Goku grabbed onto him, that was how they were able to win the battle. But the thing that we ultimately have to remember above everything else, guys, is that the way Dragon Ball is that bad things lead to good things, and Goku has to die in order to be able to fight against the Saiyans, assuming Piccolo still ran his mouth and Raditz basically sent the signal to them to come over. But the point is that Goku has to die to go to King Kai to become a lot stronger to face against future threats, because eventually, even if the Saiyans never show up, the androids are still gonna show up, and they might not be as strong as they could have been, given the fact that the Z Fighters wouldn't have gotten stronger, so Gero would have been scaling them down. But the point is that at some specific point, the androids are going to be released, and Goku's going to stand absolutely no chance against them, and everybody's going to die anyways, assuming Goku doesn't die of a heart virus, which you could say, through a butterfly effect, would probably not happen in this outcome, but we would never know. So ultimately, winning is a bad thing. Even if they did beat Raditz, it would be a horrible outcome anyways.